Coming to you from the greatest city in the world, this is the #1 showbiz podcast. It's Talk for Two. Here's your host, Matt Bailey.
Mr. Gario, and thank you very much. Welcome in, everybody, on a Monday. Well, if you're listening in real time, this is our last show for what has been an incredible 2015. We began the year as Ventriloquism Weekly, and we wrap the year as Talk for Two. I want to thank you for gifting me this year of growth. And speaking of growth, there's an announcement after the interview about something that will be available when we return in 2016. This thing keeps getting cooler and more fun each day, and I love you all for letting me do it. A special thank you to two huge reasons for all of this growth, Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. I couldn't ask for better mentors and friends in Steve and Mark. Go visit Axtel.com and order your sit stand, and please, while we are on break, listen to the tons of other great shows Mark Bogner has on the tangentboundnetwork.com. And speaking of Axtel, as with this past year, our show's New Year's return will be from the incredible CAX conference. We will have an interview with Ron Lucas live on stage in California. Plus, we have some surprises on that show I cannot even talk about right now. It's going to be Talk for Two's biggest live event yet. And hey, I hope you'll be there too. Visit cadabra.org/CAX for more. Now, let's get to the reason we're all here today. We have an incredible double-length interview with a legendary comedy writer. Gene Perret has written for more classic television than you can imagine. From All in the Family to Mama's Family, if there's a show you love from the golden age of sitcoms, he's probably written for it. His daughter, Linda Perret, is an accomplished writer in her own right. Most notably, she wrote for Bob Hope's 90th birthday special, which won an Emmy the year it aired. And there's a familial connection to Mr. Hope, as Gene was his head writer for many years. But don't think nepotism got her the gig. The real story is quite fascinating. Here now, in an illuminating conversation about comedy, writing, television, entertainment, and everything in between, our interview with Gene and Linda Perret. Gene and Linda Perret, welcome to Talk for Two. How are you today?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I am doing great. How about you, Linda?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Great. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun. Gene, I spent last night with a lot of your work only to realize I spent my childhood with your work. This is going to be a really, really exciting one. This is a father-daughter team we have, duo, I should say. They team up on some stuff. But this is going to be a really exciting one. It's a really exciting one for me. So let's just jump in and start with Gene. Gene, what made you want to become a writer?
It was just something that was there all the time. I always enjoyed it. Some of my heroes when I was young were Abbott and Costello. I loved Bob Hope.
Of course.
Many of the people of that era, I just enjoyed comedy. And wanted to have an Abbott and Costello duo sometime or another, and things just changed. I just got interested in comedy, and it just kept growing.
Oh, that's awesome. How about, now I got a same question to Linda, although I think we could guess. Linda, how'd you get started?
Kind of just fell into it through the family tree, but actually we have a newsletter called Round Table for people interested in comedy writing and performing. And I worked on it out of high school from a business standpoint, not from writing. And it was through the newsletter that we would always encourage people, Dad would always encourage people to write and do what you want to do. And I never thought I had the talent to do it. And then through the newsletter, I said, you know what, I'm going to try it. Never told Dad. And then just started doing it. I got, believe it or not, I stole one of Dad's books and started studying. And then it was through that. And then when the next person who came along and said, I'm looking for material, I submitted some of my own material. So I kind of came in through the back door, but grew up around it and loved it.
Oh, that's awesome. Back to Gene. Who gave you your first professional writing job? How'd you break through to start getting paid and get hired as a writer?
There were a bunch of them. I used to write for a local show in Philadelphia, never sold anything, but I would write for him occasionally and try stuff out. And then I got with a local comic who was also doing movies at the time. His name was Mickey Shaughnessy. And he showed some interest. I don't think I ever made $1 from him. And then on the talk show that I did for a local TV station, a comedian came on named Slappy White, and he saw my material on the desk, got my address and phone number, and gave me a call. And that was the first real contract I had. From there, I went to Phyllis Diller, and then she got me into television.
Wow. How'd Phyllis find you?
I probably found, I do know how she found me. I had a friend where I worked, my day job, and he was a stringer for some newspapers, and he went over to interview Phyllis when she played at a nightclub near Philadelphia. And he told her about me, and she said, well, tell him to send me some stuff. I sent her stuff, she bought it, and we've been together ever since, until Phyllis left us.
Yes. We've had some recent unfortunate passings in the comedy world as of late, and it's sad to see that generation passing on. But you're right. She got you into television? That sounds like it would be an interesting story. How'd that happen?
Well, I wrote for her. Excuse me. I would write through the mail, send her stuff, and get a check occasionally from her. So it was a pretty regular thing. And then she said, look, I'm buying your stuff regularly. Why don't I just pay you a fee and you just send whatever you got? So we did that. And then in 1968, she got a television show, and she asked the producers to hire me to do some of the opening monologue. So I worked for her from Philadelphia, and then the next season, the producers were impressed with what I did, and I got 2 offers to be hired in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So I took the first one that came through with a contract. It was a Jim Neighbors show.
Wow, yes. Yeah, now, you mentioned something that you worked from Philadelphia. It seems that since the dawn of time, writers have always, to some degree, worked remotely or sort of off-site of the production. Linda, can you talk a little bit about that, working, if you've ever worked where you're not in the room or you're not near the location of what you're writing for?
Yeah, it happens quite a bit. A lot of times it's just not easy to be in the thick of things. And it's the type of profession where you can do it off-site. You don't have to be where the comedian's going to be. You don't have to travel with them. So yes, you can do it from home. You can do it from other places. And especially nowadays with technology, anything you write can get to somebody instantaneously. So it makes the writing profession a lot more open for people because you don't have to pick up and move. If you want to be in television and write sitcoms or scripted television shows, most likely you're going to have to be where those are because there's meetings, there's more of a schedule. But any other type of writing, you can be wherever. I worked for Terry Fader, and he was in Las Vegas, and I was in L.A.
Yeah.
And you just do it through email.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Terry, you bring up Terry. I love him, and he did a video at one Vent Haven where he ran a writer's room on his couch. Were you a part of that, or were you still out in L.A.?
Actually, he mentions my name at the beginning and says we have one more writer. I was in L.A. at that time. I had been there the week before, and because of scheduling, couldn't be there for that. But I was working with him at that time. What
do you write for him? Is there a specific character or a specific type of material you'll do for Terry?
Whatever he needs.
I love it.
That's the amazing thing. When you hold the checkbook, you can demand whatever you want.
yeah, that's pretty much how it goes with everything. But demanding whatever you want. Your father, Gene, got you 3 Emmys for the Carol Burnett Show as part of the writing staff there. Can you talk a little bit? That was one of my favorite shows. I mentioned at the top, I spent a lot of time with your material unknowingly growing up. Carol Burnett Show, top of the list. How did that room work? How did that writer's room, what was that process like writing for Burnett?
Well, it goes through several processes, and anyone can apply at any time. What we would do more often than not is have like brainstorming sessions where all the writers would gather, we'd talk about ideas, and if an idea hit, then we generally worked in teams. One of the teams would say, we'll take that idea, we'll write that up. And once you did that, then you would go to your own room and write the sketch. And then you would turn it in, and it would either be rewritten by the head writer, or he would turn it over to a group meeting, and we would all punch it up.
Wow.
So it went through all sort of processes. We would work together. We would work as teams, and many times we would work against one another.
Wow, against one another.
Went through all sort of processes, yeah.
Yeah, against one another. I would hope all in good fun. Or was it very competitive?
No, it wasn't competitive, but sometimes in the stress of turning out material, there are some times when you just can't get material, and the inclination is to start getting angry at yourself and anybody close to you. So it could sometimes get heated, but not often. That was a great staff. We all got along very well. The writers got along, and the cast were very supportive. If we had an off day, which you have in writing,
yeah,
they wouldn't put the blame on you. Some performers will say, well, what are you trying to do, ruin my career?
Yeah.
No, they would take it and they would punch it up. And when it was finished, it would be better than when you turned it in. So you couldn't argue with that.
Now, I have to ask, I have two questions regarding the cast. How hands-on was Carol in the writing process?
Not very hands-on, except to approve something. You would write something, turn it in, and Carol would either say yes or no. Now, she wouldn't say it directly because her husband was the executive producer, so he might say it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was coming from Carol. And that's fine, because any performer should have the right to say, yes, I'll do this joke, or no, I won't do this joke, because they're the ones that have to say it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no feeling of animosity if she said, no, we're not doing this sketch. It was just not good enough.
Yeah.
But she never really did any writing, per se, except maybe in rehearsal where they would throw ad-lib lines or something like that. But the writing was left to the professionals, and she was happy with that.
Yeah, now you speak to that. And what about the flip side? This is the other question. The writer's perspective of what Tim Conway would always do to the material on tape day. He would just throw the script out the window. Now, I know one year he was included in that group with you guys for the Emmy Award, but there was a time there he would come in as a guest performer and he would just throw some of that material out the window. Would that upset the writer's room?
Not really, because he did it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really lose the script. He would just add to it. Mm-hmm. But he would pretty much stay on script. He was pretty disciplined that way. Now, he might write a script that runs 3 minutes. It might take 12 or 13 minutes before he decides to do the 3 minutes you wrote.
Yeah.
But we always enjoyed it. And a lot of times, some of the stuff he did was kept. Many times it was just discarded. We had a good time with it, but it wouldn't make air. So he was a funny man, and we went along with it. And also, he did a lot of writing himself.
Yeah. Was that the
Not
thing?
a lot, I guess, but he did some writing.
Excuse me. Was that the thing that you guys said, okay, he's joking around, he's adding to it anyway, let's just pull him in as a writer? How did he join your staff?
Well, actually, he came in pretty much as a writer. He was not a regular on the show for the entire run of the show.
Right. For something like the
first
first
9
9
until
years.
I think Yeah, I think until Lyle Wagner left. I think they brought Tim in as a regular then. But when he was a guest, in fact, one of the famous sketches of all time on the show was the Dennis sketch with him and Harvey.
Yeah.
They got involved with the Novocaine and everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, he brought that sketch in. That was his sketch.
Wow.
So he wrote that entirely, and it was a beautiful sketch. Now, when he was a regular on the show, he didn't have that kind of time to write, so he would come up with ideas, and sometimes he would sit in on the writing, and other times he would just turn it over to us, and we would take the idea and write it.
Yes. Now, let's switch back to Linda. Linda, I have no clue how old you are, so please forgive the indelicacy of this question. But what influence, if any, did the Carol Burnett Show have on you as a writer?
As a writer, probably not a lot, because I was pretty young when the show was on. In fact, I never was able to see it filmed or taped until it was going off the air, and that Dad was like, come to the show because they can't fire me anyway. I never really got that involved with that aspect of it, except for growing up around it and seeing it and loving it. But as for writing, I never really was that in tune to the writing of the Carol Burnett Show. I got more involved with Bob Hope and Phyllis Diller, and I love writing one-liners. But when Dad was doing the Bob Hope shows, the Christmas specials and the specials, I would go to the tapings every chance I got. And I loved being around it and watching it and seeing the writers. So I think I had learned more from those, the Bob Hope specials, than from the Carol Burnett Show.
How did, from your perspective, Linda, how did Bob interact with you guys? I don't know if, I guess I'm asking, did he run the writer's room, or would you take the material to him in a similar fashion? How did he interact with you guys and the process?
Well, Bob Hope was always in charge.
Yes.
He was the deciding factor on everything. A great man to work for, a wonderful man, and loved to laugh and loved humor. So it was fun to write for him.
Yeah, Gene, you were his head writer for many years. What was he like to work with?
Oh, terrific. Terrific. Again, like the Carol Burnett Show, Hope wanted good material. But if you turned in bad material, he didn't hold it against you. You had an off day. I went to his house one day, and before we got fax machines and the internet, we would have to bring the material over physically. And I handed him a bunch of material, and he hefted it. He would buy jokes by the pound.
Wow.
And he held the envelope, and he said to me, "Is this stuff brilliant?" And it wasn't. And I said, "Honestly, Bob, it's not." And he was a little taken aback with my honesty, but he thought for a minute, and he said, "Oh, the other guys will be on." So it was that kind of loose atmosphere. He wanted good material, and he had no hesitation about saying, run it through the typewriter again if it wasn't good. But he never held it against you. He knew he was going to get good material from his writers. Maybe not that particular day, but that never bothered him.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the other writers, and I know that you were his head writer for... How many years were you his head writer?
I would guess, and I don't keep the accurate records, but I would guess maybe 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I worked for him for 28 years.
Yeah. Other than the obvious sort of just man in charge kind of thing, what defines a head writer? Because I look at something like the episodes of Mama's Family where you get sole credit. How is that kind of a thing determined amongst a group of writers? It's always fascinated me.
Well, it worked differently with Bob Hope because, as Linda said, Bob Hope was really the head writer. Bob Hope went over the jokes and decided which ones were going in and so on and so forth. And we would turn in jokes, and he would go through them, and he'd put a little check mark beside the ones he liked. Then he'd go through them again and put another line beside them. So eventually he'd get down to the top jokes that he liked. And that was the monologue, whenever he put it together. As a head writer, when I took over that job, what I would do would be I would work with the other writers and try and narrow down our approach to things. Because he would say, the first thing he would say is, what can we talk about for a monologue?
Mm-hmm.
So we'd all turn in a list of topics. You know, President Nixon is doing this or whatever. So-and-so spent money on a new car, whatever the topics were. And we might have like 40 or 50 topics. So what I would do is go through the topics and put some of them together and maybe cut some of them out and turn in maybe 8, 10, 12, maybe 15 topics that we would work on. So that was my job really as head writer, was to keep the writing kind of doable rather than just being overwhelmed with 40, 50, 60 topics.
Yeah.
And then eventually, Bob Hope, after the tape, the actual taping, would sit down and now decide which jokes that were on the tape would be included in the show. And again, that was his job. He wanted what he wanted. He would sometimes ask me to sit in with him and give an opinion. And then eventually it got to the point where he would say, well, you put it together. So that would be one of the head writer's jobs, is to say, well, we've got this on tape. Now let's make it into a final tape.
Interesting. Now,
so that was when he was getting older.
Yeah. Now, Linda, I have to ask, coming in for the 90th birthday special, what was that like to kind of enter the domain and get to work with Bob Hope? And how did that come about for you?
It was wonderful. I mean, it was quite an experience. It was a lot of fun. It was something I had been working for. It came about, I had been writing one-liners and submitting them to Mr. Hope and not really getting anywhere. And then what happened was, like I said, I would go to all the tapings.
Yeah.
And I went to one of the tapings and there was a problem at the show. And there was an incident where there wasn't an audience when Mr. Hope was doing his monologue. And the producer of the show, who happened to be Bob Hope's daughter, knew I was there. And she asked me, she said, would you come in, sit in the audience, and mark down where you think it would get a big laugh, because we're going to have to put laughter in.
Yeah.
So I sat there while Mr. Hope did the monologue, pretty much the only person there, and wrote down where I thought the big jokes were, you know, a little laugh, big laugh, and gave it to Linda. And just did that as a favor, just because they were in a tight spot, and gave it to her. And then when I was leaving, she said, oh, expect a call later on. We may need another writer.
Wow.
So it was kind of being there and being open to doing a favor, which to other writers, I recommend that if you're asked to do something, do it, because you never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
And it was that. Now, again, I had been submitting material up until this point, so she did know that I was writing and what I was doing. But I think that little extra helping hand helped when it came to getting the job. And it was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun. And Mr. Hope was very gracious to me, and he just kept saying, oh, he would turn to Dad and go, okay, we're into the next generation.
Wow. It's incredible. And I have to say, I'm sitting here, I'm 21 years old. I miss that kind of comedy, and I say that without an ounce of shame. I miss that era. And, you know, last night I was doing my homework. I was watching Mama's Family, because we actually have some DVDs here in our college dorm room that, Gene, that you wrote, that you get sole writer credit for. That right there on the main title sequence. And I miss that. How did we get away from just such a golden era of, in my opinion, a golden era of comedy? What happened?
You know, I think the younger comics, and I don't mean to put them all down. I get in trouble when I do this. But they got carried away with the language and being mean. And comedy was never like that. George Burns and Milton Berle, Even Rickles has a nice streak to him. But comedy was just fun, and then all of a sudden it got a little dark and a little vicious, and I think that has hurt. Now, there are good young comics out there. Again, I'm not putting comics down. I think there's a lot of talent out there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But it just seems like the culture has changed a little bit, and not for the good.
No.
The people that I worked with, again, George Burns, Milton Berle, Danny Thomas, they cared about the audience. They wanted to entertain the audience. And then it got to where the comics didn't care about that. If you don't like my show, leave. If you know what I'm going to do and you don't like it, don't come in.
Yeah.
That's a bad attitude to me. I liked it better when they said, hey, we're going to have some fun, and I'll provide the fun and you provide the laughs, and I'll get paid.
Yeah. Well,
that was the way comedy worked.
Even examining something like Mama's Family, that was a half-hour long-form sketch comedy. In fact, I think Vicki Lawrence, in one of the specials on the DVD, explained that they were auditioning some actors for some parts in Mama's Family that didn't quite understand sketch comedy, so they weren't cast for that particular reason. And Mama is feisty and could be downright mean, but you know it's a joke. And I think sometimes with newer comics, you don't know it's a joke. You know, it's not a joke. It, like you said, it's coming from a darker place. Do you think we'll get back to a lighter, happier time? Is that? Do you see areas where that's going to come through?
I hope so. I think it will. Comedy is just going to keep people like to laugh. And sometimes you go and see a show and you're almost embarrassed by it. But it's not only stand-up comedy, but I've noticed even in the movies, there used to be lighthearted movies. Not anymore. There are very few people in movies that you like. So even they got darker. But I think it'll rebound. They'll come back. It has to, I believe.
Linda, what's your take on it? What do you see in comedy and in writing and just in the general tone of some of the entertainment we have?
I'm beginning to see the change already. I'm beginning to see comedians who are taking more of an interest in the audience and presenting material that is going to not alienate people. Mm-hmm. So I do think there is a change coming back. I think everything goes in a circle, and we're just coming around to it again. But I think also with a lot of stuff that's going on in the country, in the world, people want to laugh, and they don't want the edge to it anymore. So I do see the change. And working with a lot of comedians, I see them wanting to make that change and them consciously saying, I don't want to do this kind of material anymore. I want to do something that the whole family can enjoy. Well, and I think that's really nice.
I got to ask you, Linda, where did you see the pressure on young comics and even on television to be edgier, that a comic felt like they were not worth their salt if they didn't have four-letter words in their act or weren't working and talking about really sort of risque things? Where did that happen, and why did it happen?
Well, I think it was a sign of the times. I think the times were changing, and then comedians started to change. George Carlin is a great example of somebody who was and a great comedian, but was very clean-cut and then started to go a little bit edgier. And what happens is then when you start to become edgier, then you got noticed because you were different. So then comedians would copy that because that was what was getting noticed. That was what was hot. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's not anymore. Everybody's doing it. The problem is that the people like George Carlin, like Richie Pryor, who used the language eventually, they didn't start out using it, which is one thing that a lot of comics don't realize.
Yeah.
But then when they started using it, they still were funny. Mm-hmm. But a lot of comedians who went with the edgy, went with the risque, went with the blue material, that's all they had. They didn't have funny.
No.
And so that's what is missing. And when you take out, I think David Brenner said that when he started, he was very dirty, used every word in the book. And he asked the community, he said, why aren't I getting anywhere? And someone said, look, go home, take your 20-minute act, cut out every dirty word in it. And David Brenner did, and he said, I had like 3 minutes of material.
Wow.
There was nothing left. And he said, then it dawned on me that I didn't have an act and I had to generate material. So you can't just really rely on that, but I think the sign of the times, I think our times got edgier. I mean, if you look at the 60s and the 70s, you know, if you had a television show in the early 70s, you know, Ozzie and Harriet wasn't going to cut it on the air.
Yeah.
You know, we were into All in the Family.
Yes.
And it's just a sign of the times.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of going backwards again to where people want a warm, fuzzy feeling. And they want laughter and they want fun.
Yeah, and you've just put a question in my head for your father, which is, Gene, how do you feel about having been on the writing, which is my favorite part of any sort of process. So I have such respect for writers. Writing material that was such a response to the times. You know, you were doing All in the Family as it was happening, creating that sort of what is now just a pop culture phenomenon. How does it feel to have been part of the history of so many television shows?
Well, it felt great. The shows that I worked on and the entire era, to me, looking back, feels like a golden age of television.
Yes.
I'm not pleased with what I see today because all the premises are all the same. They're all about guys and girls getting together and having sex and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, you had to come up with a premise, like the old Dick Van Dyke Show.
Yeah.
They had to go and get good premises. Most of those shows did. Lucille Ball, as wacky as it was, they had premises, ideas that you could do material around. A great show was Seinfeld that created premises from almost nothing.
Yeah.
And that's a good kind of comedy. When you can take something trivial and turn it into a routine, now you're being creative. And they did that. It seems like all the premises today are all the same, and they're not pleasant, not enjoyable as far as I'm concerned. Of course, everybody will label me an old fogey, but I enjoyed the fogey years.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you because I like Modern Family. I like Big Bang Theory. They're the two that stick out to me. But I don't see that we have another All in the Family. I don't see that we have another Carol Burnett Show. I don't see that we have another MASH or things that really defined culture. You know, All in the Family made it okay to talk about certain things in America that people didn't like to talk about. We don't seem to have that. Television comedy doesn't seem to have that power anymore. Linda, what do you think about that?
It's really a tough question because my thing is at the time you don't realize you're doing it until afterwards. So we don't know what's going to, 20 years from now, someone may be doing an interview on the Big Bang Theory that changed our culture.
Yeah.
So it's hard to do it while you're in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But in a sense, it is century. When you push the envelope so far, there's nowhere else to push it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of pushed the envelope so far that there's really not that much more for television to go into.
Right.
With cable, you can turn on. There's not a word you can't say on television anymore.
Yeah.
There's nothing you don't see. There's nothing you can't. So we've pushed the envelope so far that there's nowhere else really to go.
Right. And Gene,
the thing I don't like about it, from a writing standpoint, is when you get backed into a corner as a writer, you have to use some creativity. You have to come up with some lines that are worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, all you do is throw an obscenity out there and you're done.
Yeah.
And it's too easy. It's just too easy. There's no work on the part of the writer anymore in that instance. I mean,
Yeah.
They're still creative writers, but But in that case, it just makes it too easy. The same with stand-up. If you're a stand-up comedian and someone heckles you from the audience, or whatever situation you're working on, come up with a clever line. But just yelling an obscenity at the heckler is not clever.
No, it's not. And I think you hit on something. I can't remember what it was. Excuse me. I can't remember what it was, but I was watching the Macy's parade, and there was a girl singing on a float. I think it was Selena Gomez or something. And the song she was singing wasn't inappropriate, but I could remember a time, even in my short time on this planet, when when the song she was singing, the material she was singing about, wouldn't have been allowed on daytime holiday television. So do you think the rules have gotten too lax in terms of what's permissible? And is that killing creativity?
Oh, I really do. And I must confess, like on the Carol Burnett Show, or especially on Laugh-In, we would sit there and be a little devious too. We would try and sneak in things that were a little bit risque, but we try and sneak it in and get it past the censors.
Yeah.
But even what we got on was kind of mild compared to today. So we were a little devious then too, but we certainly wouldn't have gone this far.
I would
there
say...
were certain times... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, there was one time I remember we were writing, I can recall the sketch. It was one with Tim Conway.
Yeah.
And it had to do with a bug that was in the hotel room where he and Carol were. And it went on and on and on, and they couldn't get rid of the bug. And finally, Tim put it outside, and now Carol was upset that the bug was separated from its family. So the ending of the sketch was Tim said, "I'll go get it." He opened the door, took one step, then we heard a loud squish, which meant he had stepped on the bug. And that was the ending. And we typed it up, and then all the writers, without any person from the network or from the show itself, no one said anything, but all the writers looked at each other and said, "We can't do that.
Wow.
We've got to get it ending." So we felt uneasy about that. Now, we could push Tim Conway out a window every week and let him land on the sidewalk, 42 stories below. But we felt uneasy squishing a bug. So even then, the writers had a certain obligation to the ethics of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So we would correct ourselves. We would censor ourselves in a sense.
I got to ask, I really got to get into the writer's head here. What was the logic there? Can't squish a bug, can push him out a window. What was the code? A little bit.
Well, I guess the difference was, Carol once said to me, it's sketch logic. I guess the idea was, if we pushed him out a window, everybody knew it was a joke.
Yeah.
And of course, we wouldn't have pushed him out a window if we had shown him landing on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
We certainly wouldn't have done that. So this, the step on the bug and the squish was just one step over the bounds. I mean, we could have done it probably and not gotten in trouble, but we didn't feel comfortable doing it. So that was the difference. I remember we used to do As the Stomach Turns, which was not the sitcom, but the soap opera.
Yeah.
That we used to do a spoof of. And there was one time when I turned in a piece and Carol Burnett said, "This is not logical." And I said, "Carol, Vicki Lawrence comes in every week with a new boyfriend. They go upstairs, they have a baby, they bring the baby down, and you throw it in the umbrella stand. What's the logic of that?"
Yeah.
She said, "It's sketch logic. You can do that." So people know it's a joke and they accept it. But there's certain times when you can't escape through sketch logic.
Yes. Now, Linda, I want to turn my focus just a little bit to you. Other than Bob Hope's 90th birthday special, what other stuff have you done? I've tried to do some research, but unfortunately, IMDb has been left less than helpful. So what other stuff have you worked on?
Well, I've done a lot for comedians. I've written for Joan Rivers, Phyllis Diller, Jimmy Walker. Knockoff Smirnoff. I did a stage show, wrote a stage show for Branson, a theater in Branson, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've been working with Terry Fader.
Yeah.
And doing that. And then we also have joke books, and Dad and I have collaborated on a bunch of joke books. We have two coming out at the beginning of 2016, two coming out the end of 2016, and a couple more underway.
I'm excited because you already have Comedy Writing Self-Taught out and the associated workbook. So
yes, that came out this year, which I'm very proud of that book. It's a great book, and hopefully will help a lot of other writers out there. And then also during all this time, like I said, I worked on the newsletter we have, which is Roundtable.
Yes.
And did more of the business aspect of comedy before getting into. We had a convention for comedy writers that we had for 19 years.
Yeah.
And worked a lot through that. But mostly mine has been through stand-up and one-liner writing.
That's great. Now, you mentioned Branson. My sort of master class in entertainment when I was growing up was Branson, so I have to ask, Branson as a place to write for and write a show for, that has to be, just from what I know of it, just the strictest place on earth to write. It has to be so squeaky clean. Did you face any struggles, or was that fun to do?
For me, it was fun to do because I usually don't write dirty material, so that was easy. Even when I write for comedians that do dirty material, I don't write dirty material.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to insinuate that you do. I just know that some comedians who consider themselves squeaky clean, they'll go to Branson and people will complain about their shows because Branson can be very picky. So
oh yeah. If you write for Branson, you have to write for the audience there.
Yeah.
You're not going to go in and bust that system because it's a system that works well for them. It's a system that's well defined for them. And if you want to write for them, if you want to perform there, you're going to have to conform to their rules. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No,
I mean, that's their market. That's what's working for them. So there's nothing wrong with that. And if you want to play that arena, that's what you're going to have to do. And I agree with you. There's a lot of people out there who go, oh, no, I'm squeaky clean. And then you see them and it's like, I don't know what your idea of clean is because that's not it.
Yeah.
So can I add something to that? Because both touched on something which I think is important for any writers who are listening. And even, I know you have a big ventriloquist audience too.
Yep.
When you write and when you're going to perform, aside from whether it's clean or not, you have to write to your audience. You have to know your audience.
Yes.
And I think when you mentioned working for Branson, you have to know who goes there. Same thing in Vegas. Vegas is a very hip town, but with not real hip audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're traveling from all over the country.
Yeah.
So whenever you're going to do a piece, you have to really do some homework and know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example of that, what I mean by that is, I spent a lot of time and I traveled with Hope to military shows. And my job, when we would land, we'd get off the plane and Bob Hope would go out to dinner with 5 or 6 generals. And I'd go and talk to the enlisted people and say, what's happening on this base?
Yes.
What are some of the places you can't go? What's the commanding officer like when he's not here? What do you say about him behind his back?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we had to do. We had to play to a military audience. We had to hit not only the military, but that particular base. We had to do jokes that only applied to them. So it's very good advice for anybody in performing, but especially in comedy. Know your audience and work to them. And if you work to your audience, the audience will love you, and that's how you become famous.
Yeah. You raised a good point, and you raised that point in your article on Daniel Robinson's Cybervent. And I was reading some of your articles there. You raised that point, I think, on your most recent essay on there. I encourage everybody to go to Cybervent, all the vents that listen, and check that out. But you bring me back to a question for Linda. Again, I'm not ignoring you here, Gene. You write
go ahead.
you write for Terry, Linda. Is it hard to find the audience to write for because of what your father pointed out about Vegas, being hip shows with an unhip audience? Is it hard to sort of nail down one specific thing? Is that a struggle, or is that not really a worry?
Not really, because Terry knows his audience and he knows what he wants. So we would get a lot of direction on what he was looking for. There were times when I would put a line in to the material, knowing I'd get a laugh from Terry, knowing he would never use it.
Yeah.
And he knew it, I knew it, but you would put one in just going, it's not going to make it anywhere further than the page, but just for fun. Mm-hmm. But Terry knows who his audience is. He knows what's going to work, what isn't going to work. So that makes it easier for the writers. The problem when you're writing for someone who doesn't know their audience, that's when the trouble comes in, because they're floundering a little bit, and so you flounder a little bit, and it just becomes a mishmash.
Yeah.
But Terry's been doing it long enough where he knows his audience, he knows his strong points, he knows what his characters can and can't say, what the audience will let them get away with.
Yeah.
And that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Now, the ventriloquist in me wants to ask, do you have a favorite character to sit down and write for when Terry asks you to write for that character? Do you just get excited?
Yeah. I love Vicky the Cougar. Whenever he says write for her, it's always fun.
Yes. Because that's one of the ones where he pushes it a little bit. Just a little, but...
Absolutely, yeah. You can go right to the edge with that one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's another point, if I could bring it up too, and I know some of your listeners are performers and some would like to be writers.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big differences in working for Hope and Phyllis Spiller and so on, and all these people, Terry Fader. You write material, and what you're doing is supplying raw materials. The performer has to have enough know-how and savvy to pick the right ones. So in writing, you can go overboard a little bit. You can write stuff that is only going to be on the page, as Linda said. Or you can write stuff that's going to hit the audience right between the eyes. But the performer has to decide that.
Yeah.
And we had a show one time, just to give you an idea. We did a show, Command Performance in England. And we had written some stuff. We were rehearsing at, I think, the Palladium.
Yeah.
And Bob Hope did a joke that the crew and everybody groaned at. It was awful. And the writers were sitting in the front row watching it. And Hope came up to the front of the stage, and he looked down, and he said, "Who wrote that joke?" And none of us would own up to it, And he looked at me, and he said, "You wrote that, didn't you?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Who picked it?" So he said, "I'll get you for that." But it's the performer that picks the jokes out, and that's their special talent. They know what they can do, and they want writers to give them ideas, but they'll pick the ones that they know are right for them, and the good ones are very good at it.
Yeah. What was you're making me think back to when we had John Max on the show, and he was talking about how many jokes he wrote for Leno compared to how many actually made it on air with him. How many jokes did you guys collectively write to give to Mr. Hope to then that he would then call from? What was the joke to monologue ratio? How many did he need in order to compile it when he was compiling it himself and picking them?
Well, it's amazing, but I mentioned earlier that we would pick topics. When we pick topics, I would write personally about 30 to 35 jokes per topic. So if let's say we had 10 topics, I would write 350 jokes.
Yeah.
So there are 10 writers. If they all did that amount, we'd have 3,500 jokes.
Yeah.
Or maybe less. They might not write that many, but we would have 2,500 to 3,500.
Wow.
On the show, typically we would do 50 jokes. Now,
wow.
He would narrow it down to, let's say, 150. And then we would do the show, and then we'd cut it down to maybe 50.
Just
So that's the amount that you would cut it down for a good monologue. And even at that, you cut it down that much, people will watch it and say, they turn to the wife and say, see what else is on.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to narrow it down. But the thing I tell writers is nobody cares how many jokes you throw away. But it's how many jokes that make it in there. If you write one that Hope loves, you earned your salary.
Yeah.
You didn't care how many were thrown in the trash can.
It takes work. Now, Phyllis Diller had a file. I saw the documentary, and she had the big file, like the Dewey Decimal System, of index cards of jokes that were written and compiled and different things. Would that kind of a thing include all of the ones that never made it to airtime on stage or on TV? Was that a catalog of everything that you guys did, or was that just the ones that kind of made it?
Oh, no, that would only be the ones that made it. They would never keep all of them that you write because some of them, they're right to do, but they're embarrassed by them.
Yeah.
In fact, the writer himself would say, I don't know why I put this joke on paper.
Yeah.
It's not worth anything. So, no, they would only pick the ones that they would consider using. Now, some of them, they might even throw those out after a while. So you really, as a writer, you really have to overwrite. You have to give the clients more than they want. If Bob Hope says, I need 3 jokes to open a talk tonight, you write 12, 15, 20. And let him pick it. But the ones that get thrown out, you don't worry about them. You know?
Yeah. We're going to wrap this up in a couple of minutes here with some last questions. But before we get to that, I have one more topic. I got to go back to Mama's Family. My favorite show growing up, hands down. I got to go back to Mama's Family. My roommate is a huge Mama's Family fan too, so she's kind of laughing her head off over here. But I asked earlier, we talked about it and compared it to, I think, the Burnett Show. But to answer the question directly, this was when we started talking about Hope. What makes somebody get sole writing credit? Because I'm assuming, and I might be wrong, that it's a group of people coming together, writing, throwing ideas around. How does Gene Perret get sole writing credit on a show? Do you sit down, write it yourself, or how do you make sure it's your name at the top?
Okay, let me ask, just out of curiosity, what was the show you saw? What was the premise?
It was Grandma USA, and then my favorite that I've always remembered, and we actually watched a couple months ago, is Family Feud. So,
Family Feud, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the way you get credit is you as a writer go into a pitch session, story session.
Yeah.
And you'll throw different ideas. You say, I've got an idea where Mama runs for mayor or whatever.
Yeah.
Or we did one about Mama went to visit her husband at the graveyard and found out he was buried next to some strange woman. And so you throw ideas. They may say, well, we've already done something like that or whatever. Then they'll finally pick one out, and they'll say, go home and write it.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go home and write it. As a writer, according to the guild rules, you owe them another rewrite. So you write it, they put notes on it, you go home and rewrite it. Then on you're done. They can take it and have the staff rewrite it or whatever. But you're entitled to sole credit based on that.
Wow.
So that's how you do it. You throw a story, you do write it, you do a rewrite, and now it's your story. Sometimes you'll see story by so-and-so, script by so-and-so. That's when they buy a story, but they don't like the writing, so they'll get another person to write it. But that's how you do it. And it doesn't mean that it's all yours, but it means that it was your idea and you did the first few drafts.
Yeah.
My partner and I did a show for All in the Family, real quick. I don't want to.
Yeah, please. No, we have as long as you need.
We did a show for them, and they kept saying afterwards, because we worked right down the corridor from them on the Carol Burnett Show, and they'd say, you got to write another script for us. And we didn't have time. We said, we're too busy now. But anyway, they kept saying, please write another script, write another script. Then when we saw the show air, there was only 1 or 2 lines that we had written on the show. So they had rewritten it so much that we only had 2 lines left intact. And then they'd ask us, "We'll do another show." And we said, "Do the show we wrote last time because you didn't use any of it." So it can change, but you still get the credit.
Yeah.
But a lot of the credits are determined by the Writers Guild too.
Yeah.
So that's one place to look too, because they will decide what screen credit a writer will get, how much you put into it, and what they have to give you as credit.
Yeah.
So that's defined by the Writers Guild.
That is so interesting to me. And it gets into an intellectual property kind of thing that we could talk about next time we have you guys on, because I'd love to have you both back. And just to talk about this specifically, because we could do an hour just on this, which is how do you protect a story idea that doesn't have complete scripting? How do you monetize a story idea? The whole idea of writing and doing treatments and stuff is just, you got to forgive me for nerding out a little bit today, because this is stuff I love. And so before we get to these last questions, my last question about Mama's Family, then I promise I'll shut up about it.
You don't have to. I'm proud of it. It's a good show.
One thing we would never guess about the production of that show. One thing that's never been told, or you don't think has been told, about how that show ran.
Oh, you mean something that
yeah, behind the
nobody's
scenes.
watching it,
Something funny from behind the scenes. Yeah.
Well, one thing a lot of people don't realize, but Vicky played that part without, I want to say that correctly, without makeup. Vicky didn't go in and get made up as an old woman.
Yeah.
Her face was still Vicki Lawrence. I mean, she wore a wig, the costume, she had a fat body under the dress, and things like that. But she didn't get made up as an old lady. So when you watch it and you believe she is Mama, it's because she's playing the part of Mama. And she played it so brilliant, in which she did most of the roles she played.
Yeah.
But that was one thing that a lot of people don't realize. They figured, well, boy, she must have gone into work early to get made up as an old woman. No, she didn't. She put on the wig, put on the dress, and out came Vicki Lawrence as Mama. It's quite a transformation.
It's incredible, and I love that character. And I read some stuff where they had to soften her up a bit. Writers had to soften her up a bit for primetime, because the Mama on the family sketches was just intentionally a bit more bitter than the Mama of the series, and the way they did it was brilliant. And I don't know how involved you were in that, but
well, the sketch itself was a little bit mean, and part of that, I don't mean to put down, but part of that came from Carol.
Yeah.
But the part of Eunice was a bitter young lady.
Yeah.
So the thing was a little bit bitter, but the way that the whole thing started was a team of writers did a sketch about, it was with, what's the British actor? Roddy
McDowell.
Great actor. Pardon?
Roddy McDowell?
Roddy McDowell. We did a sketch for him where he was a well-known author, and he had interviewed the Queen and all that.
Yeah.
And he was coming home to the family. And all they paid attention to was the dog. They could care less that he was a famous celebrity. And they all got into the roles so much. Carol got into Eunice. Harvey got into Eunice's husband. I don't know if Tim was in that or not, but he got into his role. And they loved it. And they said, do some more of those. And we did several of them each season. And that, when we went off the air, became a spin-off that became Mama's Family. But it started as one sketch, and it just worked beautifully.
It really did. It really did work beautifully. And this conversation has been beautiful. It's awesome. I have 2 closing questions, one for Linda and one for Gene. And we're going to start with Linda. Linda, what is one thing, if you had to boil it down, that your father overall has taught you about being a writer?
Oh, boy. That's a tough question. The one thing I think would be to keep doing it.
Keep doing
If
it.
you like it if this is what you want to do, keep doing it. Try everything. You're going to have successes. You're going to have failures, and just keep going.
Yeah.
And I have to say the one thing I'm completely grateful to my dad for is that he's been supportive. In every aspect that I've done in writing, he has been supportive and has been there. And I think that's something every writer, every performer needs, because there's a lot of rejection in this business.
Yeah.
So it's nice to know there's someone in your corner. And I've had that with both my mom and my dad, and that's been wonderful.
It is.
But I think from a writing standpoint, I think it is to just keep doing it. If you want to do it, write everything, get it to people, and just keep trying.
Yes. And that brings me to Gene, and the reason we waited with Gene is because what is one thing your daughter has taught you about being a writer?
Again, to keep writing, because as soon as I slow down, she moves in. I got to keep writing so she doesn't become a better writer than I am. No, I don't know. It's just been fun to see that things worked out for me in a certain way, and now it's fun to see it happening all over again. You know, I guess I'm like the father at the Little League game.
Yeah.
You know, I'm living my life through another writer, and it's kind of fun to see things happen. When we go to the to see Terry Fader's show, I'm probably the proudest person there. You know, and I didn't do anything, but I'm just proud that my daughter is writing for it, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the biggest thrill, to see it continuing, and that someone appreciated comedy enough to get into the business and keep it going.
That is wonderful. The father-daughter duo of Gene and Linda Perret. Get the book. Look for the new books coming in 2016. But in the meantime, go ahead and get Comedy Writing Self-Taught. It is in the iBook store for those of you that want to just grab it and get a quick download. And please take a look at their work. If you haven't watched Almost Family, or you need to brush up on your All in the Family, please do it, because it's some of the best writing and some of the best writers right here on the phone. So thank you so much to both of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. You made it very easy. Thank you.
Thank you both so very much again. To say that was great fun is an understatement. I hope you enjoy your holiday, and I look forward to the release of your new books next year. And you, our listeners, before I let you go, I have to tell you something I'm really, really excited about for next year. I want to share it with you now, though it's nothing huge, but Talk, FORTWO.com will be available as our domain when we return. That's right, our website will streamline with our name. So don't worry, all the old addresses with the numeral and our old site, ventriloquismweekly.com, will still point to the site. It's still the same website. I'm just talking about the domain. It's nothing too major, but I'm excited because it feels like having all our papers in order. Well, that's it for today and for 2015 on Talk for Two. I cannot wait to see you in 2016 and getting to chat with some of you at CAX before we return on February 1st. In the meantime, head over to talk4, spell out 2.com for even more Talk for Two. Reach out by emailing talk4twocast@gmail.com and find our group or like us on Facebook by searching for Talk for Two. Tweet us and about us using @ and hashtag Talk42. A huge final thank you to our listeners and everyone who made this season and this whole year a great success for the show. I wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. Signing off for Talk for Two, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding everyone out there to keep talking for two.
You can hear more show business interviews with the stars at talkfor2.com, where you'll also find one-of-a-kind products to improve your own show. That's talk, the number 4, TWO.com.